Hey, did you know that emotional eating could be behind your unexplained weight gain or your inability to lose the weight? Sometimes childhood traumas or beliefs that you hold by yourself can play a part in stopping you from getting the body that you would like. Learn more about how you can overcome the traumas around emotional eating and transform yourself into somebody who can get the body composition that they want. My friend Matty Lansdown is an expert who helps many women in this area, so make sure to check out this podcast. If you're looking to get thicker, fuller, and stronger hair, then make sure to check out fullyvital.com. The team has come up with 4 different unique products that stimulate the hair follicles in 4 different ways to create thicker, fuller, and stronger hair. So make sure to check out fullyvital.com and use the code anti-aging-hacks for 15% off. Are you enjoying the videos on this channel? If you are, then please make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. Our goal on this channel is to slow down your aging and to help you look and feel younger so you can live your best life. With that said, make sure to hit subscribe and let's get on with the episode. Hello and welcome back to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. Today I have on my show my friend Matty Lansdown, who is an in-demand nutritionist, scientist, international speaker, emotional eating coach, and podcast host who uses his knowledge and expertise in psychology and nutrition to facilitate transformational health stories by helping people answer the question, why can't I just eat healthy? Through his programs, Matty supports women to lose weight, get their energy back, boost their sex drive, get their confidence back, and be kinder to themselves. That sounds amazing, Matty. Matty also hosts a podcast called How to Not Get Sick and Die, which is one of Australia's favorite health and wellness podcasts. With that said, Matty, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks Show.
Hey, Faraz. Thanks so much for the invite to come and hang out with you.
So give us your background, dude. You've got a very interesting background where you were working, I believe, with cancer patients, and that helped you change your entire trajectory of what you were doing. So walk us through your early childhood and how you got into where you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the countryside. My mum was a nurse. And I guess an influential part of that story in the early years was that we were in a small enough town, and it was long enough ago that I used to go to work with my mum. So I would run around the hospital and the ward and spend time playing games with like people that were old and sick and dying. And, I had no idea. I was just loving the attention. I was like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old that was just loving all of this attention and learning and curiosity that was just fostered with war stories and learning how to play cards and learning how to play pool and all of this stuff. And so at that age, I really developed this sort of positive attachment to the idea of hospitals and medicine, and my mum as a nurse, and so that led to me sort of growing up, and through the years of being a teenager, I sort of went into a sort of an elite athlete space, as many teenage boys do, and I was a really competitive swimmer, and so sort of started understanding health and wellness from a competitive angle, and then I moved to the city for study and research and got into a study for, I became a molecular biologist is fundamentally what I did. So I studied forensics actually at university, but my skill set on the other side of that I was employed in for the next sort of decade was in molecular biology. And in that field, I worked for a nutritional epigenetics company, working with elite athletes. I also lived at different points with strength and conditioning coaches of one of our most elite football teams here in Australia. And so I had this exposure to, being an athlete myself and that type of thing, but also the exposure to the hospital. And my next job was, in cancer research. And so I was a part of a team of cancer researchers. I was young and very low down the ladder in the beginning. And so it was there that I basically thought, I'd been working there for a few months, and I thought I should really learn about cancer, basically, and go back to basics, because I didn't have a history of oncology or anything in my employment or study. So I started at the World Health Organization website, and it said in the very first sentence, and this was like a life-changing moment that I didn't realize was happening until later, but the first sentence was that 90 to 95% of cancers are caused by diet, lifestyle, and tobacco. And I was like, whoa, because at that moment, like many of the people possibly listening, I just thought cancer was bad luck. Like everybody that gets cancer, it's bad luck. And still, like, this was a long time ago, but still you would have that experience where if somebody tells you they've got cancer, everybody in the room or in the conversation just goes, Oh no. Like this instant surrender to your death, essentially. And the next sentence of that was that only 5 to 7% of people have basically genetic bad luck. They're in a situation where they've got no choice, they're born with it. It was going to happen no matter what. And so this really challenged my beliefs at the time. And I was like, whoa, if the World Health Organization say this, and they run most of the world's Western hospitals, then why is this hospital not diet, lifestyle, and tobacco medicine? And I asked my professor that, who laughed at me at the time, and just said, "Oh, Matty, if it was that simple, we would have figured it out years ago." And that began my journey down researching all the alternative ways to work with cancer. And I was doing that outside of my job, and learning about Ayurvedic medicine and traditional Chinese medicine, and learning about capitalism and learning about big pharmaceutical companies and the hold that they have over governments, economically speaking, and the population because of all of the employment that they provide and the tax that's paid. And like, it's a really complex, multi-layered system to understand that you as the individual, as the end user, are the last person that is thought of in regards to your health. And so, which sounds very conspiracy theory kind of stuff. But trust me, I've been down the rabbit holes, and it's all a business, just like every business we walk into. And so it doesn't mean that that business doesn't help people. I just think now that there's far better ways to help people. And so from there, and walking through the hospital every day, walking through clinic every day, I would see visibly that everybody was overweight. Not everyone, but a very vast majority. And so I thought, all right, if being overweight and being obese leads to, cancer and then all the other diseases, diabetes, Alzheimer's, fibromyalgia, like all of them, if being overweight's the number one thing, I should become a nutritionist. So I did that. I became a nutritionist, and I did all these food as medicine certifications, and then I started doing talks, at different wellness events and retreats and seeing clients, and realized that everybody I ever spoke to, they already knew what to eat. And I was like, why did I get a nutrition degree? Everybody already knows that meat and vegetables is a pretty good idea. And irrelevant of socioeconomic class, everybody roughly knows that. And they also know that chocolate for breakfast is not a good idea. And that doing that is like a naughty thing to do, So it was like irrelevant of education, irrelevant of economic status. Everybody knew that. So that's when I said, okay, what's the next layer? And that's where I work now, which is, people saying, I know what to do. Why don't I do it? Or why can't I do what's good for me? Or why don't I eat the healthy food? And that's the space that I help people with now, which is really their mindset and their belief systems and their relationship with food.
Mm-hmm. And it appears that this is more important than I've even thought. And so that's why I want to dig down with you. But before I go there, so as a young man in Australia, in Melbourne, you weren't hanging out on the beach with your six-pack and drinking a bunch of beers? You were worried about cancer?
Well, I mean, I didn't move to the city until I was an adult, and so I grew up in the countryside. And I was an athlete. I was at training for swimming 10 to 12 times a week for about 4 or 5 years. I was really going for some big success with that. So, I was, super fit. But at the same time, when you're talking teenage boys, they can eat and drink whatever they like. And I was definitely going to house parties underage and paying people to, or figuring out how to get beer purchased for me. But when you're so, athletic and growing, there's no impact. You don't care about anything, right? Yeah. But it wasn't until I moved to the city that I started just joining all of the dots over time. And it wasn't my own personal health journey that drove me there. It was more just an observation of what didn't feel right to me. And I just ended up getting angry because I felt like I'd been lied to about, 90 to 95% of cancers are diet and lifestyle. I was like, how do I not know this? Diet and lifestyle is so easy to change. We can do it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So something you just said is really interesting to me because my father has diabetes and he's pretty skinny. He's not overweight at all. In fact, he might be a little bit underweight, but very active guy, just loves life, just has his friends, is visiting with them once a day or whatnot. Mom typically stays at home more, but he's out a lot, at least every single day. And so he knows, man, I've had the conversations with him like, hey, Dad, listen, diabetes is a lifestyle disease. You've got it. We got to fix it. We got to eat these types of foods. We got to eat less. We got to do all these things. I've given him Dr. Jason Fung's book, like, reversing diabetes or whatnot. He's read it back front to back. But he still doesn't change his habits. He still loves eating the foods that he loves to eat. And they happen to be high carby foods. And he's like, yeah, I'll take my metformin right after my meal. Okay, fine. But how about you change your behavior? So what's your perspective, Matty? Why aren't people more open? They know what to do, like you said. Why aren't they more open to changing their behavior around their lifestyle and their being overweight?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think as well, people come to this, they arrive at this place in different times, because the reality is that it is much deeper than just being told what to eat. And a lot of people are confronted by that. They think it's woo-woo. They think it's spiritual hippie nonsense, and it's personal development jargon. They're like, whatever, and the reality is, as humans, we are wired to find shortcuts, because that helps the species move forward and propagate and make smarter decisions and be safer. So I totally resonate with the idea of being like against, going to that next layer of depth in order to work with this stuff. Because as you said, whether people have got their heads totally full of information, and most people that become my clients, they've found me on a podcast. So they're already researchers, right? So we know that they know what to do. I think the word that you used in there is that he loves these foods. And the important word in there is love, right? Mm-hmm. And I know people are like, oh, here we go, like talking about feelings, especially men react like that to this conversation. But when you love food and it serves an emotional function in your life, and we could even make a more manly example, getting to the end of the day and needing a beer. You really need that beer to come down and relax. Or for women, wine is often the thing, overnight. Mm-hmm. I've got to have that wine in order to calm my nervous system. What you're doing is, there's lots of ways to calm your nervous system, but you're having an emotional experience that you're looking to change the state of, right? So sugar and foods often change the state of the body. Sugar particularly is a psychoactive substance. And those substances that go into our body, alcohol, drugs, sugar, they change the way you feel, right? And they give you an experience. It's a hormonal experience. It's a neurotransmitter experience. But the way that we interpret that is by the way we feel, whether it be love, whether it be connection, whether it be less stress than we had 5 minutes ago, whether it be loneliness, whether it be depression, whether it be anxiety. And hormonally speaking, often the thing that we're seeking in all of those, the situations, whether the negative emotion or a positive emotion, is a dopamine hit. We're looking for dopamine, which is a happy hormone. So we either want to improve the state of feeling that we're having, which is like when people binge, they often are like, give me more. It's kind of that sugar addiction behavior or addictive behavior. Same with alcohol. And when we feel lonely and sad, we're looking for comfort. And many people can't even sit at their desks and do work without a bag of sweets or a bag of lollies or chocolate. And often it's because people are so uncomfortable doing the work that they're doing or being focused on just a single task. They need a distraction, or they might be even doing a task that they feel like they're terrible doing, and they need a little comfort. They need a little pleasure to do the spreadsheet that they hate doing, right? And so all of this stuff fundamentally is an emotional need. It's an emotional void that we're trying to fill with something that gives us, just fills the void a little bit, that we're starting to feel better about the situation. And so I think that is the big issue with many people, is that we do all of this emotional eating to fill these gaps in time. And the reason we do it as well in the Western world and most of the world is because everything is so incredibly cheap. It's so incredibly accessible 24 hours a day. I mean, the next step for Amazon delivery is basically that they'll feed you. They'll literally put food in your face. Like it's so hyper accessible. And so if we think about the shortcut mechanism of the brain, which is a deep evolutionary mechanism designed for good purposes, when we've got this privileged world with all of this access, the shortcut is always the easiest option to pleasure, right? Because we often confuse social evolution with physical, biological evolution. And although we've got all of this social evolution around us and our access to food and our choice and consciousness to make, different decisions, the evolutionary drive is always stronger. The biological drive ends up overriding that. So it says, just eat the chocolate, just order the Uber Eats, just get the ice cream out of the fridge and sit in front of Netflix. But it all comes back to this emotional piece. And I think this is a huge part of the cancer epidemic, the diabetes epidemic, the Alzheimer's epidemic, because we're not given the skills to navigate our emotions as young children.
Dude, that's amazing. And as you were talking, something came up for me. Many times in my life, I've gone into situations or homes where, the two people they happen to be married in their 50s or 60s. And it just feels like, at least the men I would talk to are just bored of their life. Like they've retired, they don't have purpose anymore. They're just like lounging around, just bored, right? No zest for life, nothing. But then it comes time to eat food. And if the wife, in this case, the wife cooked, but if she cooked the stuff that they love to eat, they would just light up like little kids that were, on a trampoline, for example. And so I'd observed this multiple times in my life, and it gnawed in my brain where I'm thinking to myself, there's nothing else that's exciting for them right now, but the food is one thing they derive pleasure from, they derive comfort from, because like the rush, the endorphins they feel after eating the salty foods gets them going, right? Gets the hormones, the neurotransmitters going. But ultimately it's hurting them because they're overindulging in the one thing that's giving them pleasure, they're overindulging in. So let's come back to the emotional part of this. What in the work that you've done, what is the need behind the emotion that they're trying to fill with the food or the chips or the lollies that they're trying to have? What's going on in the background?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be different for everybody. And the thing with sugar is that it caters to so many emotions. So you can have a bad day at work or have a breakup with a partner or have a traumatic event and get a pizza and ice cream on the way home for all of those things. But equally, you can have a different experience, which has got a totally different set of emotions attached to it, and still go towards sugar. So often people might come home from a birthday party or, where they've given themselves permission to enjoy all the food, and they'll still get more on the way home, and then they'll still get more. And that's because of the addictive mechanism of the brain and tolerance, right? Is that we want to keep feeling that good feeling. And so I think the underlying need for many people is, it's not one, but fundamentally, I think it's connection is a big one. Love, nurture, acceptance. It's all of those types of feelings, because dopamine, when we experience dopamine, it's usually in the presence of some kind of emotion like that, or success, or achievement, or accomplishment. And so I think, all of those things can be attached to the dopamine release. And this is part of the issue as well with social media and and sugar companies. And the thing that they have in common is that they give incorrect information to the brain about the dopamine experience that we're having, because it comes at no risk, which a dopamine experience should come at risk. For instance, what I mean by that is that historically, as hunter-gatherers, we wouldn't get these huge hits until we hunted the animal, which came at great risk, until we spent days or weeks courting the woman, impressing the woman before we were able to have sex, and so this dope or 9 months to have a baby and be a parent, and like there was a lot of risk involved to get your dopamine hit, whereas now there's no risk involved at all. So when we do arrive at these dopamine hits with sugar and social media, we feel empty, because there was no risk. The scales are just tipping more and more in the direction of pleasure. And the way that it works in the brain is that it's actually a balance between pain and pleasure. And so if we have too much pleasure, we will inevitably create a situation that creates pain in order to balance that out in the mind. And so I think for many people, it can be all sorts of different emotions, but because dopamine is the answer to all of them, sugar serves as the purpose to eat sugar when you're sad, when you're happy, when you're lonely, when you're in between. And I think you raised a really good point with relationships, is that a lot of relationships get, stuck in a rut or in a pattern. And the only way that those two people feel love and connection in the room is when they cook or when they eat, or when they go out to dinner. And so, we get people that identify as foodies, which is totally okay to be a foodie. I would probably consider myself as a foodie. But if being a foodie is your sole source of pleasure or achievement or accomplishment or connection, because that's the only place you get a dopamine hit, then you might need to review your relationship. Might need to review the job that you work in. If it's making you miserable and you feel no degree of accomplishment or success, then you're going to be dopamine deficient by the end of the day. So of course, on the way home, you'll get a pack of chips or a packet of cookies or Domino's pizza, because you're deficient in dopamine by the end of the day.
Really interesting points, man. I also remember I went to a Dr. Joe Dispenza seminar, I think it was over a year and a half ago. And he said something that I've been thinking about since then. He said that by the time we're in our mid 30s, let's just say 40, for example, by the time you're 40, you've kind of experienced life. You know what it's like. You know how it's like to go to Vegas or a boys' weekend. You know how it's like to get probably married or engaged or have birthday parties or all the highs, the big dopamine hits that are manufactured in today's society. You felt all of that. And now you're at a place where there's something gnawing at you. You're like, okay, I've experienced all that in the past, but what now? And so a lot of people feel this sense of unease in their bodies. It's just an ongoing low. It's like a hum. It's just that's what they feel like for a long term. And so they do all these things to make that feeling go away. They eat the foods, they do the drugs, they do the alcohol, like whatever highs or dopamine you can chase in the environment around you. People will chase that. So it ties back to something you're saying. And so let's go back to the reasons why you said there's certain reasons they don't feel enough love or enough connection or whatnot. And that's why people are compensating for these patterns. And so what's a way to kind of think about what needs to get fixed or helped before people can start to get healthy patterns again, healthy eating patterns, for example?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because a lot of people think it's all about addition, which is conventional diet culture, right? Which is add kale, add steak, add healthy practices, add meditation, add. And I think most people would benefit far more from subtraction, which is removing stuff, right? But it's not just physical stuff. Before you make any changes, the first step to creating long-term sustainable change, and this is the way to go about it if you want to do it long-term. If you've got a competition that's going on, or, you're an athlete for a couple of, years or something, and you've got a different focus, that's different. That's kind of a different set of thought patterns that need to be applied to that situation. But if you're someone that's looking for, I need to change the way that I show up with nutrition or to manage stress or whatever for the rest of my life, then you need to start, and this is why people don't like it, because it's uncomfortable, is that you need to start by reflecting on the life that you've had and understanding it. And before you change anything, identify the things that you think you want to change, and don't change them, but start asking why. So when you catch yourself in the middle of one of those habits, maybe you've got chocolate in your mouth when you remember, oh, Matty told me to think of this. Like, how did I get here? What are the parts? Because usually this stuff is deeply automated. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't even know it's happening. And, you Faraz, and probably your listeners have a time where you've eaten something and you don't even remember. You finished and you were like, oh, I don't even remember eating that. I want to have another one so I can actually enjoy it the second time, right? So it's totally unconscious consumption. So the first thing is to become aware of that unconscious behavior and catch yourself in it. Don't beat yourself up. That's part of the toxic cycle and self-sabotage cycle. It's about curiosity. So being like, how did I get here? What were the steps that led to this moment? What happened today? And just keep asking that question over and over and over again. So you become highly familiar with the cycle. And then when you're familiar with all the different parts of the cycle, so like the anatomy of the habit or the recurring routine, then you want to start asking why. Why do I feel pulled towards this food at the end of the day? It's like, so I've identified the pattern is get up, feel grumpy, go to the job that I hate, eat chocolate on the way home. All right. So why? Okay, obviously I don't like my job, or there's not enough happiness in my day, or the chocolate makes me feel like at the end of the day, like, oh, finally I can let go of all the shitty things that are happening in my life. And so you're starting to become self-literate. You're starting to really understand who you are as a person and the way that you react to the world. And it's not until then that we make long-term sustainable change. In the absence of a scary diagnosis or a family death, there's not many other ways that you can shock yourself into absolute transformation. So we need to do it like this. We need to become self-literate. And the reason that people find this uncomfortable is they usually peel the onion, and there's a reason that onions make you cry. It's because you find parts of yourself that you're not happy with, you're confronted by, that are disappointing, that are embarrassing. And we need to be okay in that space and know that that's going to come up, and it's okay because they're all human experiences. And if you feel that way, the rest of us do too, right? So we need to start there before we start thinking about how do we actually change it and what do we change it to.
Wow, that is so powerful, Matty. By the way, folks, I met Matty through a couple of former guests on the podcast. One is Danielle Hamilton. The other one's Karen Martell. Both now good friends of mine, and they spoke very highly of Matty. So So welcome, Matty. And
Thank you.
I know why they speak very highly of you, because the stuff that you're talking about, nobody talks about in this space, in the health and wellness space, why we were actually eating instead of eat kale, understanding why you're actually eating. And I think in the last couple of years, I have gotten much, much more aware of myself, my feelings, my thoughts, why I'm acting certain ways. And I've just also started getting more feedback from people as to how I show up in the world. And I think that's one of the best things I've done for myself, is becoming more aware. And now I catch myself sometimes thinking about it in the heat of the moment. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm doing. Why am I doing this? What's going on here? Why did I do this? And so I started journaling as well. And that helps me just write it on paper, and then it makes so much more sense for me. So this is beautiful. I would highly, highly encourage what Matty's saying, is to become aware of what you're doing so that you can wean yourself off whatever those things are that are causing you to act this way. Okay. Is trauma included in any of this, or are we compensating for trauma in our lives by eating too much as well, Matty?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two schools of thought. Well, two groups of people is probably a better way to say it, which is one that food consumption is a trauma response for some people. And I've had many clients that reflect on being young and not having money, or not having food, or, being one of 8 children. And so food was, strictly rationed. And so obviously when they got a job as an adult and got income, their lack of safety as a child around food was able to be solved by over consuming food on a regular basis. So you've got those stories. You've also got stories of people that had like a really traumatic event, and they went to sugar for the very first time in order to make them feel safe, secure, certain, those types of things. And then it just became the default way that they feel security.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got that too. But then you've also got another group of people, which is that have gone to therapy for years, and they just simply are biologically and mentally addicted to sugar. And I say mentally because, remember, the sugar companies spend millions and millions of dollars every year with psychologists. And I've even had one of those psychologists on my podcast, but psychologists and engineers, to create foods that light up your dopamine pathways and that create an addictive behavior. So those companies, so you might be in the group of people that's just like, I don't really have a trauma. I'm just addicted to sugar because sugar is addictive. It might be that simple. And the reality is that even if that you are in that group, over time, you will learn to go towards it in particular scenarios, right? So you will inevitably embed it into a set of emotions anyway. So the way I see it, it's like, whether there's a trauma or whether there's not a trauma, by the time somebody gets to talking to me, it's usually attached to some type of emotion, whether it be from when you were 10 years old, or whether it be just the pattern that has developed as an adult that now has access to those types of food, limitlessly. So there's, you can be a trauma response. It can be simply that the marketing and advertising has done the job that it's meant to do.
Okay. Let's get into diets. And I have a few more questions for you here, but let's get into diets. I have known many people that have gone on diets. I will say unsuccessfully, looking over the long term. I think the data suggests that most people that start diets within 6 months to a year, they're back to their baseline weight. At least most of them are. I have also experienced people that have undergone bariatric surgery, and where they basically shrunk their stomach, stapled it, and as a consequence lost over 100 pounds, which seems unbelievable. But sadly enough, within 18 months, they were back to their previous weight. They had gained 100 pounds back again. So what the heck is going on? Why are people not able to stick to a diet? This is certainly not something that they haven't tried before. They've tried many times. So why can't they stick to it?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because I've had clients in the same boat, like where they've had bariatric surgery and lost, similar amounts of weight, and then a few years later managed to put it all back on somehow. And so, I guess there's two things there, right? Is that once you've had some type of surgery, not only are you not dealing with the psychology or the emotions behind what's going on there, but also you've now limited your physical ability to absorb nutrition, because going towards these foods isn't 100% emotional eating. I often say that if you like snacking, for instance, I say it's one of two reasons. You're either emotionally eating or sugar addicted, or you have a protein deficiency, right? Or an electrolyte deficiency, which would come with the protein naturally. So there is physical aspects to that. But I think for many people that find a way to put such a significant amount of weight back on, there's a couple of factors. One is that they never dealt with the emotional relationship that they had with food, or the way that they used food as a tool to solve their emotional problems before they got the surgery. And sure, I know here in Australia, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but I think before bariatric surgery, you've got to have 2 psychologist appointments. And obviously, the surgeon is sending you to a psychologist that's 100% going to give them their business back, right? And you can't, anyone that's ever done personal development, be it psychology or shamanism or spirituality, whatever, you don't solve anything in 2 sessions. Like, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. So I think there's that first, that those emotional problems, challenges, needs haven't been looked at all. But there's also an identity piece. When somebody makes such massive transformation in a very tiny period of time and they look in the mirror, there can often be a rejection of what you see in the mirror, which is, I don't know who I'm looking at, because there's been such a significant change, you don't actually recognize yourself. And so some people then go to create the person they recognize because they feel so unsafe with the reflection in the mirror, because it's so different. Their idea of safety is gone. Their idea of security is gone, because they're like, who is this? Who is looking back at me? And that's not everybody, but I've definitely talked to people that have had that experience where they were like, I didn't know who I was. My husband didn't know who I was. Everybody was different around me. And I just felt like a stranger in my own body. And so there's that too. So there's, like, whilst we all want overnight transformation, we need to be ready for the results of that. And sometimes we're not. And sometimes it's really confronting, because who we are is who we were yesterday. And in order to change, we need to do it slowly over time so that we still recognize ourselves along the journey.
I guess one quick other question as well. When we're young, most people are, let's just say, normal weight, right? 20s, even part of their 30s. But over time, metabolism slows down, and maybe your food habits don't change, or we're using food for emotional reasons or what have you. And so we start to pack on the weight. But at some point, you would say, well, my thermostat is back there, and I am sliding down into gaining, 10 pounds a year or 5 pounds a year, and this is going to keep continuing. The thermostat never turns around and takes you in the positive direction, does it? It always takes you back to the baseline, which is not good for you. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah. I mean, well, it depends, because the other thing is with like diets is that we're sold this idea that once you're on this 12-week diet, or once you're on this 28-day program, all your problems are solved. And if you actually think about your life like a mountain, like a hill, it's like you might have spent, and in my client's case, somewhere between 20 and 40 years walking to the top of the mountain. And so the idea that, a tiny amount of time in comparison to 40 years of creating the problem, and then in 28 days we're going to solve it, is just ludicrous. There's a lot of work that needs to happen. So if we're in a situation where the thermostat's going in the wrong direction every single year over time, we have to realize that if that's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 or more, that we're going to have to actually put a bit of time commitment on the other side, walking down the mountain, right? Which is, sure, it won't take another 40 years, but it's not going to take, 8 weeks. We need to spend time maybe dedicating the next 5 years of our life to get towards the place that we want to be. And I know that's not sexy and nobody wants to buy that, and you'll never see it on a landing page, but that's the truth.
That is the truth, unfortunately. Okay, so what's the ideal way to start losing the weight and get healthy? We know you've talked about becoming aware and maybe even noticing why you're doing certain things or why you're eating something in the heat of the moment. And where would you start? Where would you start with behavior change? The other thing you mentioned is people don't typically change behavior until something big happens, like they get a, God forbid, cancer diagnosis, or something happens where it completely, like the whole world shifts upside down. That is one inflection point. But before people get to that, what are some other ways they can start the process of change, and how do you encourage them to do that?
Yeah, I think finding a reason and a motivation to change other than just I need to lose weight. And whenever people inquire about my program, that's exactly where I start with them. When they're just asking, like, what's it all about? How do I make this change? They might say weight loss or gut health or reverse my diabetes. And I say, why? Like, why do you want to do that?
Mm.
Because it's easier to stay the same, right? And we all know that it's easy to stay the same. So you need to really understand why you want to do it. And then we usually get to a place of, I want to be around for the kids. I'm already struggling to keep up with my kids, or, I want to be around for the grandkids. And we start to get to a lot more meaningful layers, or getting around the golf course is starting to feel really uncomfortable. Or I'm sick of going to the toilet and it just being, 8 times a day and it being an awful experience. And, I just want to feel normal, and these kind of things. So you need to really understand why, not just lose weight because society says I'm overweight. We need to actually get to a level of depth that is meaningful, because when we're actually struggling in the journey, which you will, because the journey's never easy for anybody, including me, you're going to have tough times, and you need to latch onto something that actually picks you up out of that tough time, and you'll fall off the bandwagon and you'll go back to your old habits. And instead of staying there, you need something that will get you back up again, right? And so I think the first place is to really understand your why. And then from there, I really believe in the 1 tweak a week model. So if we're talking practically speaking, so obviously the emotional stuff we've talked about in here, like reflect on the day and start understanding your patterns before you change them. But I think with nutrition, it's the same. It's like one small step at a time. Start with breakfast. Fix breakfast for the next month and don't worry about any other meal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just get breakfast right. And then once you've figured that out and you know how to shop for it and you know how to schedule it and you know how your body feels after a good breakfast, then we move to lunch. Then do lunch the next month. So I'm really big on that slow and steady wins the race idea.
Mm-hmm. I love that because it's so much easier to do one thing at a time. And I've tried to do multiple things at a time. And typically after a few weeks, even myself, I've got very good will, but I just stopped doing it because it's just too much work or it's taking too much out of my day. And I realized that it's not as important as it was. And so why does willpower, if you try to force all of it in one time, Matty, why does willpower not last beyond a certain time?
That's a good question. I think when we need to use too much willpower, we're too far out of our comfort zone. Now, I know personal development will have you think that, get out of your comfort zone, do all of those things. And in different contexts, I totally agree. However, if willpower worked, it would have worked the first time and you wouldn't need to listen to this podcast, right? So in the context of diet, if we need to use loads of willpower, we're actually too far out of our comfort zone. And so this is where the 1 tweak a week idea really takes effect in willpower, because you should have 1 foot in your comfort zone and 1 foot out. And instead of jumping all the way to this, swimming in pools of kale and, never eating chocolate again and meditating for 7 hours a day, instead of jumping all the way there, you won't stay there because it's so foreign and it's so time consuming and so overwhelming, right? So we need to actually come back and just say, all right, how much willpower do I need? If I need too much, then I'm changing too much, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to scale that back a little bit. So we want the health behaviors and habits that we adopt to begin becoming part of who we are rather than something that we force upon ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So it's more of an identity that you're changing and incorporating over time.
Yes.
Which I've heard experts say this, and I believe it, that the identity is the most important force in the universe for a human being. Who you are defines everything about you and how you show up in the world. So I love that. How does the progression go? So they come to you and they say, Matty, I'm interested. You have the conversation and you onboard them. And then you're touching base with them once a week and helping them. Or is this a course? Like how does the progression go for the person? What's the touch?
Yeah, so there's a couple of layers of the way that you can get involved, but yeah, I'm really big on the idea of support, and I have one-on-one clients, but most people are in groups, and I think as well that I really believe in the idea that we heal best in community, because back to the identity piece is that the people that are most likely to tear you down for your decision making is the people in your house. It's the people you live with, right? So it's your friends, your family, your husband, your wife. And so if we don't have a community with shared values outside of that group, then we're going to fall apart really easily, because on Friday night when you don't have a drink, they're just going to be like, why aren't you drinking? Why don't you have a drink? Get a drink. Here's a drink. Like, and or you go to brunch or go out for dinner and like, oh, why aren't you having pasta? You don't eat pizza, or you're gluten free, and they start attacking you, right? And sure, we can talk about how that they feel offended because it's a judgment on them, but really, what matters for you is that eventually that will break you and you will succumb to the values of the group. So you need to attach yourself to a group with a different value structure and a different goal, so that when those attacks come in, it's okay, because you've got a community that you connect with and a tribe and a group that are like, oh yeah, but that's okay because I connect with these people over here, right? So I really believe that there's strength in being a part of a group and a community that you can reach out to and say, oh, this happened last night, and I ended up with chocolate or pizza, and I'm having trouble with my husband who keeps trying to sabotage my efforts, which I see happen all the time. But because you've got this safe place to go, and it's really, really important. And so in there, we touch base with everybody once a week. We have Zoom calls, we have catch-ups, we have a community where people can post whatever they want. And I'm really big on being sort of the anti-diet culture guy. And what I mean by that is I almost want you to share all of the things that go wrong. Because that's where the healing and the repair and the self-acceptance and managing self-sabotage needs to happen. Whereas in many conventional diet programs, that's a place of shame and embarrassment for people. They're not honest because they're worried they'll be humiliated in front of the group. They end up just dropping off at the back, and then they end up lying to the group and themselves about what's really happening. So I'm kind of the opposite. It's like, what went wrong this week? Let's all share,
I love that. Community is so important, especially as you're embarking on something that's going to be a part of you for a long time. You just can't do it. You could do it yourself, but it's so much harder. And if you have somebody to talk to, or an email you can send, or post somewhere in a group, and you get feedback from other people, from kindred souls on the same journey, it really helps. Are there any character traits that you notice of people that tend to do well in losing the weight and changing their identity versus people that stride for a while and then leave because they don't want to do it anymore?
Yeah, I think the reason that I mostly work with women 40 to 60 years old, and the oldest client I've ever had 75, is because they've suffered enough. That's the most common thing. The younger people that I work with, usually they're still in that bikini body marketing kind of world and abs and six packs, and they just haven't been on the yo-yo diet cycle long enough to actually be in a situation where they're like, fine, Matty, I'll go deeper. I'll do this emotional work, So yeah, that's the common trait, is that people have just like, I've tried calorie counting and doing all those things for 20 years or 30 years. I'm done.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's great, Matty. I love what I'm hearing. So where can people find you? Where can they get the program? Give us your links. If there's Instagram, if there's Facebook, whatever that is, let us know.
Yeah, sure. So got a podcast as well, which you, Faraz, have been on, which is fantastic, called How to Not Get Sick and Die. Talk all things health and wellness and medicine and emotional eating. Then my website, mattylansdown.com, and I guess the best place to get in touch with me is probably there. But also we've got a 10-day challenge as well to heal your unhealthy relationship with food. So that's totally free. So everybody's welcome to jump into that and get involved. And that's a good way to introduce yourself to all of the ideas and the concepts and get into my world, I guess.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Where can they get the 10-day challenge?
Yeah, so I can get it on the website, or I can shoot over the link to you as well if you like.
Totally. I'll put that in the show notes as well. And folks, check it out. Love Matty. Love the way he's approaching this and how he's coming to helping people get results that last over a long time. Not just you try something for 12 weeks and then you're back to where you were before. And after a few trials of that or cycles of that, you're frustrated. So I know that weight loss is a real problem. I see that when you're out and about, it's happening to a lot of people. And for some, there's different reasons for it, but there's help as well. And so, highly recommend you get on the 10-day list and check it out and see what Matty has to offer for yourself. With that, Matty, thank you so much for coming on the Anti-Aging Hack Show. Really appreciate it, man. Hope to have you back in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Faraz. I appreciate the opportunity to share.